All right, let's be honest with ourselves today. Who, after the first reading, had the song in your head? A couple of you? How many of you are now mad at me because you forgot there was a song and now you have the song in your head? Thanks. It's what everyone remembers from this bit of Ezekiel. Them bones gonna walk around, and so on and so on. Now, as strange as it seems for a herd of bones to come back together and re-people themselves, it's about one of the tamer scenes in Ezekiel. You see, in the book of Ezekiel, it starts out with wheels in the sky and living creatures and, well, let's see, ancient Israelite army men, symbolic head shaving, symbolic hiking, symbolic cooking, a whole lot of other symbolic things. Really, you get 32 chapters of Ezekiel singing the doom song. Doom, 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 doom. For 32 chapters of doom. And it's just painful because it's doom after doom after doom. Doom on you, doom on this, doom on that, doom on everything. And then all of a sudden, you get to chapter 33 and the tone of Ezekiel starts to change. It starts to talk about an undooming, a restoration after all of this doom that happened, all of the stuff that God is going to make right after all of the terrible stuff. And it's really kind of cool. You get this picture of Israel being restored. You get this picture of the king coming back to his throne. You get the picture of a new city, and most importantly for the Jewish people, a new temple. One that is far greater than the one before, and one that God himself will build. And nowhere is this picture of restoration more evident than in the story of the dry bones. Because God takes Ezekiel out to this field, and there is, well, it's a battlefield that no one cleaned up after. This valley just full of weathered old bones. And it's those weathered old bones that the people of Israel were feeling like. We talked last week when we were talking about Daniel, how the Israelites had lost so much. They had been conquered, their temple had been destroyed, a fourth of them had been shipped off to a foreign country, and they were pretty lost. Their king was imprisoned, and they had no hope. They felt like these dry, withered bones that weren't really good for anything. But God says to Ezekiel, prophesy to the bones. And Ezekiel does, and the bones come together with a huge rattling sound, and bone and muscle and skin covers them back up, and you've got these, well, now they kind of look like fresh corpses because they're still not moving. And so Ezekiel said, or God says to Ezekiel, prophesy to the breath now. So it's very interesting. All of this happens, Ezekiel prophesies to the bones, and they're almost alive. But then God says, prophesy to the breath, or prophesy to the spirit. It's probably the same word. And the Spirit comes from the four winds and rushes upon them, and all of these, what once was bones, are now alive again. Now, if this was like some of Jesus' parables, at this point it would stop, and you'd be like, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? It's like when Jesus tells the farming parables, and I'm just kind of like, whoop. But this time, God continues on with an explanation. And he says very clearly, these bones are the people of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up and our hope is gone. Therefore prophesy to them, I'm going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you will know that I am the Lord. I will put my spirit in you and you will live. Then you will know that I am the Lord. This is a big statement to a people who have lost their hope. God is saying, you feel like weathered bones? I can fix that. These are people their best youth have become Babylonian officials. They had lost family and friends, and there wasn't a lot of hope to go around. And that's exactly what God is starting to give them a reminder that when this time of exile is over, when this time of hopelessness is over, there is something new. It's the same message that Jesus says to Mary and Martha, and especially Martha in this passage in the Gospels. Their brother Lazarus had just died after Jesus took quite a long time to travel from Jerusalem to Bethany, or from Jericho to Bethany. And the sisters didn't have much hope. Their brother was gone. And they even say, Jesus, if you had just been here, our brother wouldn't have died. And Jesus goes, well, I'm the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me, even though they die, will live again. It's a message that is hope in a time of hopelessness. And it's what God is so good at, to find someone when they're at their bottom and to pull them up, sometimes kicking and screaming. But God will take people from this hopelessness and give them hope. And there's nothing that seems more hopeless than death. There's nothing to us that seems more hopeless than something dying. Because what we're used to is when something dies, it doesn't come back. Whether it's a person, an animal, a laptop that you accidentally spilled some Coke on. When things die, they don't generally come back from that. And so God gives us this message of hope. Even though they die, through Christ they live. We're at a place in Holy Cross's life where it feels like we might be a little closer to death than not. We see every week that there's less people in the pews. We see in the budget reports that it's not exactly the prettiest thing in the world. And it makes us nervous because we feel like death might be coming. But what does God say when there's death? What is the message that God says when there's dried, old, withered bones in a valley? Prophesy to the bones. And what do the bones do? Only louder and more rattly. Because when it comes to death, God is all about bringing hope to death. To remind us that whenever there is death, there is also resurrection. Because that's how God works. When Lazarus died, he was immediately resurrected by Jesus. When Jesus died 3 days later, he was resurrected, opening the door for all of us also to rise again. And this gospel and the reading from Ezekiel, it's a message of hope more than just for us as individuals, but for us as a church. Because we know that our God is one who raises from the dead. Times may be hard now, but God promises for us restoration. Times may be hard, but God promises something new. Because just like the Israelites heard that God will restore them, I trust that God will restore us. Because each and every one of us are precious to him. This church is precious to him. And when it comes to us, I trust that God will do what he promises. That God promises to kick death in the teeth and raise us anew. Because that is the good news that he has. That right around the corner from death is always resurrection. In whatever circumstance we mean. Because in Christ, there is victory, there is forgiveness, and most importantly, there is life. Our resurrected Lord gives life to all of us and to everything that he is involved in.